first time for me to come up to the Institute of Fire in Scotland. So thanks for having me. And it's a good, in my opinion, this looks like a good turnout actually. Those the IQ events I've been to. Yeah, well, thanks for making the time tonight. So geotechnical update. We'll go through some of the guidance that QNJAC has produced over the years, and I'll give you an update on QNJAC as well. Mark's given an update, so I can skip past that picture of me, which is always a bit awkward because I don't always resemble. No, I don't know if I look better or worse, probably worse than that photograph. But Mark did say, yeah, I do chair the QNJAC Geotechnical Subgroup, and I'm also involved with the PERC subcommittee. And the reason I mentioned that, actually, I just want to mention those two committees. For me, in my role with Tarmac and technical services, those are some of the key things for me: geotechnics and reserves and resources reporting. And you can't really have one without the other in mind. If you've got a site that is being run safely and is optimized, chances are you're going to maximize that reserve and have assurance that when you're reporting reserves, that they are actually reserves that are feasible and safe to extract. So yeah, that is important. So geotechnical update. What is QNJAC? There's lots of acronyms in our industry, isn't there? And we get so used to using them that I think sometimes it's worth just reminding us what that actually means. QOI's National Joint Advisory Committee, bit of a mouthful, but the QNJAC has been around for 30 years. It's a tripartite organisation in that it has volunteer representatives from industry, trade bodies, and HSE. And that's quite an important combination, actually, when we are discussing safety matters within our industry, that you have people around that table that are representing industry ourselves, but also having the HSE's input in there is important. I'll come on to it later, but stuff like guidance that comes from the QNJAC is that it isn't legal requirements, it is just guidance. And it's important to bear that in mind, that when we're talking about anything here, it's giving you best advice. Don't feel this is the only way to do things. And when we do write our guidance, we have to think about we're trying to make this fit everyone, and of course it's not. So it is a bit of a balancing act to produce something that's meaningful, but that isn't too explicit, that ties us up in knots. So guidance always has a bit of a kind of a warning there that you have to use it through a lens of kind of understanding its limitations. So come on to this. These are the QNJAC working groups. The geotechnical one, as we mentioned, we've also got drilling and blasting. And over the years, the geotechnical and the drill and blast groups have worked quite closely together. As you'd imagine, quarry design, drilling and blasting, quite intrinsically linked, at least they should be. And then some of the guidance, we actually talk about improving that link. There's a working group on managing contractors, leadership and workforce engagement. Mental health and wellbeing, that's a bit more of a recent one, and plan to fix and mobile. All of these groups are quite busy doing various things, and we create task groups within them. Within the geotechnical group, we have some task and finish groups looking at new guidance, but there's actually a new, quite specific task group looking at the use of drones in quarries. And this just reflects how we're trying to keep pace with changes, whether that's through safety issues or, in this case, new technology that can help us or can actually present a bit of a challenge to us. Drones in particular, an example of that. So since I'll come on to the geotechnical guidance, how much we've done, but I would say is we used to have a QNJAC app I think that's now defunct, and it might get reinstated, but what we have got quite recently is a new website for QNJAC. it's important to note really as well here, I'm not trying to sell anyone anything tonight. All of this is completely free, and I did a stand for QNJAC at the Hillhead show a while back, and some people, some operators, particularly from the smaller companies, were surprised that all that information was for free. You know, safety and health information, you know, in some respects seen as a commodity, and then you buy this kind of input in. Well, here you can go on, all of this stuff is freely available and you can use and engage with it. You can see the various working groups all listed out there. You click on one of those and it'll take you into the relevant part of the site. And when I say encourage to engage with it, and I'll mention it again at the end, but we're always interested for people to engage with these groups. The QNJAC Geotechnical Group has quite a number of people on the list, although there's probably sort of 30 odd people. There's probably within that, like most committees, organisations, there's a core of people that do the actual kind of heavy lifting. So it's open to everyone, and in fact, the geotechnical one, and I'm sure all the others would be keen to say, it's not just for geotechnical specialists or technical people. You know, in fact, to keep relevant and to make sure the guidance we produce is actually of valid and of some practical use, operators and people with that production mindset probably are very welcome, and in fact probably much needed in some of these. So yeah, you go on the website, click in there, and you'll get to all the stuff that we're going to talk through tonight. So, published guidance overview. Since 2009, the Geotechnical Subgroup have produced 17 pieces of guidance, all listed out there. And quite ambitiously tonight, we're going to try and just rattle through some of these now, go through them and just have a conversation around them. I'll take them in kind of groups. We'll run through. We'll pick up some questions. In fact, it'll be useful if we have any questions or comments as we go through. I'm not going to profess I've got all the answers. I know a few people in mind, so we can do that just to break it up a bit. And the point really is to give you a flavour of what's out there. We'll also look at, and we'll talk briefly again about the future guidance that's coming out. And I want to find out from everyone as well, you know, what would you like from QNJAC? They produce guidance. We produce guidance, but we also try and engage in events like this. This year, we'll have done, by the end of the year, probably about 7 IOQ talks. Some of those are talks like this, some of it's CPD days. A first for us this year was a discussion session as well with some geotechnical specialists at a geology conference quite recently, talking about some quite specific issues there around geotechnical reporting codes and competence of geotechnical specialists. We can pick up on some of that here, particularly when we look at appointment of geotechnical specialists and what we might expect of them. So yeah, quite a list here. I just wonder, and I'm not expecting well, I might be surprised, but how many people have looked at any QNJAC guidance? That's quite a show of hands, actually. That's more than I'd have thought. Often when I speak to people, you know, they've heard of it, but they've not really found a way in. I don't know if you've seen it directly through the website. You've been given it. Both, maybe. Yeah. It's quite useful because a lot of people have got round a table over the years and really thought about this, and it'll have distilled guidance from often some of the main operators, safety standards and other things like that. So it's good to be aware of. Right, so although they're grouped, they're not really related, these, but I was just going to pick through these first 5 topics. Abandonment or ceasing of operations at a quarry. This guidance was created quite some time ago, I'm not sure when. And in fact, all the guidance we produced, we're going to go through and update. Fundamentally, sound in terms of relevance of the quarry regs. It's more about the form of it, looking at the usability of it. As we go through, you'll see its guidance is in various formats, PowerPoints, toolbox talks, guidance notes, and the like. What I like about this piece of guidance is that it uses a flow chart, kind of Q&A thing, which is quite user-friendly. Although you do have to there's no cheating, you have to kind of start at the top and work your way down. I also like this guidance because it actually tackles something that I think would be quite a difficult thing to answer in terms of when is a quarry not a quarry. And for those of us that are involved with notification or denotification of quarries, or understanding where the quarry regs are applicable or not, this comes in quite useful. Has anyone had experience of notifying ceasing quarry issues? Yeah.
I'll keep quiet for the audience to talk about it. Talking.
Yeah. It's a good subject to look at, and some of the questions on here, and I appreciate this is small. I mean, I'm just looking to see it myself, but has the quarry been registered or worked under the quarry regs 1999? So that's the first question. If you answer no to it, this guidance isn't applicable. Fine, that's the simple. But obviously, in most cases, the yes. Has a notice of abandonment or ceasing of operations been given to the HSE in accordance with Regulation 45? Yes. Okay, so if you have done that, you go over that side. If you haven't, are you still the registered operator or owner? Let's just say yes. Has the restoration scheme been completed? So you're still doing restoration works on the site? Yes, you are. No, it hasn't been completed. Continue to operate the quarry in accordance with the 1999 quarry regulations. So I think it's quite simple, but there might be cases where you might be thinking, she's like, oh, are we still doing that? We're still operating like that. Are there exceptions to this? There might be. But typically, there was a lot of thought went into this to try and get this right. I mean, you shouldn't take this on kind of blind faith, but it's a very useful chart to use for that. We'll move on to the next piece, because we've got a few good words. Does anybody want to pick it on this?
I think the problem with this one is, if you read that note, it says the quarry is left in safe condition, which comes in quarry regs, but each quarry must be risk assessed. So when I looked at abandoned quarries, there's a whole range of quarries in terms of they've been abandoned 25 years ago, there's no rock traps in place, there's public access to dog walkers, that's obviously a risk. So the risk assessment takes place to have, you must put bunds in place. You can't restore the quarry, there's no money for that. But you risk assess the bunds, the rock traps requirement, the fencing, the extra fencing, jiggy plants, all that kind of thing. So I think it's obviously vague to risk assess each quarry in turn. If it's very prescriptive, you'd be spending £100,000 each quarry to make it safe, and that might bag up to other companies. You just wouldn't do that.
It's a good point, and I think this is it's a broader point there as well. This case, this assessment is the case, but I find myself, and I should be quite familiar with this, but I find myself referring to these type of charts quite often just to help with decision making on things. So the next one here, blast designs, techniques to improve quarry face stability. What this piece of guidance was trying to do, and in fact there's another piece that comes in later also, was to try and improve the connection and the consultation here between blast design and also quarry design. And this was a joint piece of guidance that came out with the shot firing group, and looking at the shot firing rules and how that integrated with the QDP. There's a lot in this, that's why I'm checking the notes here, because we've only got the one slide to cover it, but if you go on there and look in there, you'll see things around, you'll see detail around edge protection as well, how important that is, and also the importance of pre-drill surveys. There is actually another piece of guidance that looked at the importance of getting effective profiling of faces, particularly around rock traps, so you get the toe faces scanning or blasting. It would be quite a natural question for someone to ask you, geotechnical specialist or some from agency, to say, why do you have permanent spacing of X blast design? Just go and say, and just to come back and say, well, we've always done it that way, isn't the best kind of answer. It would be a case of, well, it's based upon the ground conditions, it's been refined, it's been modified, with taking account of the geology and other things like that. It's something we've had various over the years focuses on. I know within Tom is really engaging with this, with the explosive supervisors, whether they're or shot fires, whether they're internal or external. A lot of this work is contracted out now, so it's ever more important to make that connection, I think, if you're operating. Is there anyone here that works for explosives? So I don't know how engaged you feel with the operators and site teams.
I think it's something that's evolved over the years and people are much more aware of quarry face coming to an end of life. It doesn't happen overnight. There's a lead up to it, and a lot of people are much more aware of it.
Yeah, it's it's a key to what we sometimes see as a quarry design or a geotechnical parameters that say, your form final faces or even active faces maybe at 70 degrees or something. Okay, you're going to drill holes like that, is that practically going to work? And if you've got scenarios like that on your sites where your design is saying one thing and rules are saying something, and then what's actually happening in practice in the quarry is different, that suggests a disconnect or communication. It's those kind of things that, again, a quarries inspector or someone from your own safety might look at and say, wait a minute, why are these things talking to each other? Are people really engage with this? Another piece of guidance here: construction of solid tips. I was going to say this is a fairly straightforward piece of guidance, and in some ways it is. It's made to look straightforward, I think, by the fact we're using some job cards here. These happen to be from Tom. They've been used within this guidance. Again, they won't fit every scenario, so there's a health warning with these. But it's quite useful to have a graphical representation of this kind of stuff that you could share with operators in the vehicles. They could even have copies of these kind of things laminated of the vehicle with them, again, modified to suit the specific scenario. But geotechnics on one hand can be made to appear horrendously complex, and then some of the, there's no secret, I think some of the analysis is, some of the maths behind it and whatever, but actually on the ground and actually day to day, this stuff doesn't have to be. So I do quite like these type of diagrams. So yeah, toolbox talk with a geotechnical theme to it here. Good CPD for even if you're not going to necessarily use them on sites. Talking through. Does anyone use job cards on their sites? It's a well kind of way of communicating this stuff. Duties of the operator. This is useful, I think, in that if you have a new director, managing director, operations manager come into a site who may not be familiar with the quarry regulations, and you can't presume that people coming in always have that knowledge of the quarry regs. It's a good document. It's fairly clear, easy to read, but quite a thing to get to grips with. Part 6 of the quarry regs is quite a chunk of that book. There is some guidance here. I think this could do with a bit of a refresh in terms of the look and feel of it. But there is something you could point that person towards and say, if you want to get familiar with the quarry regs and really understand why we're doing this on the site, and have a look at this with a copy of the quarry regs in one hand, and it will talk you through, as it says there, the duties of an operator. I mean, I suppose, you know, even who is the operator, who is signed up as the responsible competent person, and that helps focus the mind for them if you're trying to promote certain safety issues or challenges or costs on site related to geotechnics. How many people in here are 8.1Cs or 8.1D appointees? Yeah. So quite often, you know, if it was anything like me, I remember when I was in site in the Midlands, I probably, looking back, I probably didn't, when I signed up to that, did I really appreciate what I was actually signing up for there in terms of my responsibility to the quarry regs? It was all written out in the next paragraph of the regs, but I think if I'd have gone through something like this at the time, you know, that would have given me quite an appreciation and empowered me to better make better decisions. Attached with this one is it's just an appendix. This is a form that you could use to notify significant hazards. We'll talk about significant hazards in a bit as well, but one aspect of a significant hazard is once you've identified that it is such or is going to be such, you notify the HSC. It's one method of capturing information and sending it off to them with a letter. Has anyone had a visit from the HSC to their sites in recent years? I mean, it's not been, I would say, there's not been so much presence in terms of just generic site visits, but you know, they have had a reduced team, but I expect to see more of that. And you know, the good thing about being on QNJAC is we have a good, you know, connection through with them. My technique sits on the geotechnical group and the QNJAC board as well, which is useful. But you know, they're very conscious of the importance of this kind of thing. You know, notifying, keeping in contact with them on changes in sites. Yeah, so this one, another piece on excavation and tip rules. Key document on the site for me. You know, if you're doing anything on a quarry, one of the main things is digging the excavation and forming tips and stockpiles. And when it says tips, that includes stockpiles as well. The little preamble on the front of this piece of guidance I just copied in here because this would apply to all the guidance that comes from QNJAC. It's been endorsed by QNJAC. Following this guidance is not compulsory. You are free to take other action. Health and safety inspectors seek to secure compliance with the law and may refer to the context of this information sheet as illustrating compliance. So, yeah, it's to say that you know you don't have to follow the any of this guidance to the letter. That said, excavation and tip rules, you have to have excavation and tip rules. Exactly how you do that, how they look. So, yeah, the guidance has various bits and pieces in it, and then at the back, try and make this useful. because you can just read loads of guidance, but actually, what are you left with at the end? You might have loads of questions. The appendix here just helps give you some kind of structure that you could follow to create your rules. Now, stood here coming from one of the big operators, I can say, well, you know, oh, yeah, we've got a geotechnical safety standard internally, we've got prescribed documents and forms. That's not going to be the same for everyone. Some companies won't have anything, some will have certain bits and pieces, and even if you have, it's often worth checking that documentation. Is it up to date? Are there any gaps within that? So, yeah, we've got quite a long list of bits and pieces in there. Obviously, it'll be tailored to your site and what's going on. And that point about tailoring it is so important when it comes to excavation and tip rules. If I've done it myself years ago, I remember being on a sand and gravel quarry, looking at the excavation and tip rules, seeing referencing to drilling and blasting. You think, goodness, has anyone actually read these rules? And you know, and who created them? You know, is it the managers? Also, it's important to have that kind of ownership of it. Does anyone here like managers' rules and teams? Yeah. So I should imagine you've probably got a set of teams that probably be handed down, you know, from site to site. And I appreciate this is one amongst a whole rake of rules and folders and things that you have. Are they, in your case, are they quite, is it rules, is it quite a big document?
Yeah, it's extensive, yeah. It was all operation, it's a living document, as you say, it's changes when there's a change in method of excavation or tips and the rules are changed, as simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, because when they change, you know, it's maintaining that kind of relevance. And then another thing is, you know, and I go through, I read through a lot of meetings, and I know Mark will read through a lot of them. It can be quite a painful job going through, making sure they're all that. Then, you know, who's on the receiving end of these rules? Who do they actually understand them? How are they actually communicated to the people that face? And, you know, a good way of doing that would be through kind of toolbox talks and also incorporating imagery, job cards, anything that makes it a bit more engaging. So we've done, on a bit of a marathon here, we've done 5 bits, and again, that's a very light touch. I'd encourage anyone, if you've got an interest, have a look at some of this stuff. Excellent. So we're going to go on to these next 4. Before I do, is there any questions or raise on points in 5 so far? Face surveying. This came about, and again, in the spirit of trying to tackle issues that arise in the industry. This came about because of a challenge we were having with, and questions we were having around the use of bunds at tower faces, and I mentioned it earlier on the blasting. You put rock trap bunds up. Could they impede the ability to profile the face or blast? So do you then, one extreme is you just take away rock trap bunds, and you can scan profile the face as you've got a problem. But some people were going down that route thinking, well, okay, that means you're profiling the shots are safer, but then you're potentially contravening the quarry regs that you've got these open faces, no rock traps. Then looking at how you demarcate areas that maybe haven't got rock traps so that you can profile the faces or take shots. And the whole thing was getting, you know, a bit confusing, I'd say. It's still case by case, this needs to be looked at. But so this guidance was there to try and help with that. When I think that one challenge was with the demarcation buttons is if you demarcate an area that hasn't got any rock cut buttons, you demarcate it, how far back do you go without demarcation before you've actually lost control over that area, so people could inadvertently go in and operate under an undetected case. And there were instances of that happening, and I'm sure probably be still. Has anyone got any direct experience with this kind of scenario?
Robert, I think I'm right in saying there's nothing in the regs that says you have to have a rock trap ditch under a face, is it?
No, I think they have to have, what risk assessments have you done to, and that's the point, I suppose. It starts with risk assessment.
You treat it as a danger area, how you deal with it is something else.
That's it. And I think this is where we were trying to point people to say, well, okay, treat it as a danger area. And then in doing so, you'd think, well, okay, how big could or should that danger area be? What signage controls have I got? I've been in some sites where you can, you can inadvertently step into an area. There's no rock traps. Machines can creep towards that face.
A lot of this crept in with the move to back actors working at the face. You work off a platform.
Yeah.
And the lazy part was to leave the platform. Because it took time to take it down before they were all the rest of it. But inherently, this is just about managing access to the area.
Yeah.
As simple as that. It's an operational face, generally.
No, that's a good point. And I think in some ways you can, by actively managing it and actually putting the thought into this, it shows that, we're not blindly just by demarcating big areas, leaving them open, or putting rock traps across areas that maybe you're creating more trouble than you need to. So it's quite nuanced. It's case by case. It's hard to give a kind of a blanket point, and hence why this guidance came out. I mean, one thing on the technology, and we mentioned drones earlier. The use of drones and surveying can happen. To move on to this one, and it's possible to have a favourite piece of guidance. I'd say this is probably one of mine. It's one of the more recent ones, and it's a geotechnical self-audit. And it's quite, this doesn't really look very exciting at all, does it? But what it is, it's a series of questions you can go through. You can print this off, or you can use it. I think it's going to be as an interactive PDF, whereby you can answer yes or no and put actions into these. But it asks you a series of intentionally kind of leading questions about geotechnical management. Some operators will have regular audits on their sites by internal or even possibly external people. They will come in and check the condition of paperwork, and is the paperwork to date, and is that in accord with what's actually happening on the site. But many won't, and if you haven't, then this can be quite useful. First question in the general section: is there an appointed geotechnical specialist for the quarry? And if someone's saying, well, why do I need one, or what is that? It references the regulation, so that's regulation 33 of the quarry regs. Copy of the quarry regs, so I always recommend a hard copy of that, and this printed out. You could really go some way, or someone who's new on your site, possibly someone that's trying to build up their kind of geotechnical competence could go through this and come back with potentially quite a useful action plan to address some of the stuff. Now, it's not it shouldn't be seen as kind of a fault finding exercise, because chances are you go through all these questions and there's even more than what you see here. You're going to come up with a rank of things, but I think it might give you a way of getting an action plan together should you want to. But it leads, and sometimes the questions are quite similar, but it's leading you to try and say, basically, have you got an appointed specialist in this case? Have you got a geotechnical assessment that's fit for purpose? Have you got excavation tip rules that relate to them, etc., etc. for those that are in operational quarries, would you know if you've got a geotechnical specialist appointed? Yeah, listen, I mean, typically most people using external geotechnical. Yeah, it's a bit of a mix there. And there should be, I mean, particularly if that site has any significant hazards on it, those hazards they have been appraised and identified as significant hazards and then assessed accordingly. And any outcomes from those appraisals and assessments should be available to pretty much everyone who's working in that site if they want to see them.
So I think number 12 is the quarry boundary plan show a boundary which accurately reflects the area of the quarry. That was something often picked up on audits, that a lot of plans had the lease boundary or the area of tarmac interest, which wasn't the quarry boundary. It was a massive area covering, you know, hundreds of hectares, which wasn't the actual quarry boundary. So we had to actually make sure the boundary was applicable to that quarry. If you had, say, into a forestry area, guy cutting down trees effectively in the quarry boundary, which isn't right, or farming fields being worked in the quarry boundary, which wasn't right. We had to make sure that was constrained to just take in the quarry boundary and not run too wild.
That's a good point, isn't it? Because if you're, particularly if you're an appointee, agency MD, and you've got a quarry boundary identified as a load of fun and potentially haven't got control of, you would be quite controlled about what that boundary is and what you're responsible for, what you can have control over. Yeah, that is an interesting one. And some of those things actually that are in here will be you should have access to within, and it's listed in Schedule 1 of the requirements, what should be in the geotechnical assessment. Some of those things we covered off answering these questions. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot. Every one of these actually you look at, you think, yeah, there's a discussion. So yeah, I'd encourage you to have a look at it. It is something I know I keep mentioning the HC on it, but I am aware. I think that they're quite interested in this, and that, you know, inspectors may say to you, oh, are you aware of the self-audit? Have you had a go at it, or do you review your health and safety measures in other ways? This is one nice way of showing we've done it with regard to geotechnics. So the next piece, guidance on selecting geotechnical specialists. So it's the duty operator to appoint a geotechnical specialist. And you can see their duties beyond that as well. Ensure that significant findings and conclusions are recorded by the specialist and that the geotechnical specialist signs and dates the document. Ensures that any information available to him which may be relevant for the purposes of a geotechnical assessment is made available, and ensure that any remedial works identified during the geotechnical assessment are completed by the date specified. That is a very important point at the end. If you pay someone to come in and do a geotechnical assessment report for you, it's worth having very good conversations with them whilst they're on site, whilst they're drafting those reports, to really understand what actions they're going to recommend and the timeframes to do them in. Yeah, if you've got a geotechnical assessment on site and it's telling you that there's certain remedial actions doing and they haven't been done, that puts you in a difficult spot. So yeah, the operator needs to appoint someone there. This checklist was put in terms of what would be a requirement for competency around geotechnical specialists. And funny enough, this is a conversation and discussion we were having, or started to have, at a recent event, talking to geologists, geotechnical specialists about some of this stuff. As an operator appointing someone, be able to assure yourself that the person that's giving you the advice is competent. That's hard. It's a hard thing to do, actually. But I'd advise anyone that has a geotechnical specialist or is thinking of appointing one, always ask for kind of competency statements and details from them. Mark and I were having a discussion earlier actually about different quarries and different sites, and the geologies of them vary significantly. We were talking about heat and the challenges of working with that, and that's quite unique to Scotland. A geotechnical specialist familiar working with sandy gravel in the south isn't so the best place to guide you. They might have experience in the past, obviously.
I think the last line is the ability to communicate the findings effectively. I mean, I've seen some reports previously that are just very too wordy, and the guys on site can't actually understand what's been asked of them. It's got to be clear and concise with hopefully enough annotated photographs they can understand, oh yes, one's there, rock trap there, I know what I'm doing. If it's too wordy, they can't actually understand what they're meant to be doing.
It's a very good point. It can be quite a fine art that to get that distilled into those kind of messages. And it's the same with the interiors. How do you then take that and put that into working with the industry side? This one, guidance to managing change to excavation tips. I like this one because it's got these flow charts, and also because managing change, I think, is probably one of the biggest challenges we have with the quarries and geotechnics. Typically, and particularly with the hardstone sites, we kind of know what we've got to deal with, but things change from the inception of the quarry through their very long life, and the ability to appraise that change and understand courses of action from there is quite important. So the flowchart helps you with that. And there's actually here, changes to relevant site personnel, including contractors. Sometimes that can get overlooked, actually, that's a pretty significant change in the quarry, new quarry manager, possibly even a new explosive supervisor, shot firer. What are we going to do about that change? Are we going to assess their competency against the job role? Are we going to develop a plan for them, authorize them for tasks where competent, review the ENT rules, in light of any new controls, or share them and communicate them with them? Question 2, impact of any recent industry safety incidents regarding quarry development. So that's another thing, as things change, if things happened in the industry, have there been any major incidents, and it runs you down that list. The next one here, questions 3 to 24. So this is where it's asking you, this form asks you a series of questions. Is there any new work proposed on an existing tip or establishing a new tip? Yes or no? And you go through. Now, if you've answered any of those, yes, chances are you need to do an appraisal. Who in here feels that they can do an appraisal? So there's a few. I just imagine a lot of people are deemed competent to do an appraisal, and quite rightly, that's an important aspect of managing the quarry and managing change. And it's really in doing that appraisal, it's a regulation 32 appraisal that can lead to the identification or not of a significant hazard, and then that leads you into geotechnical assessment. There's probably much fewer people in the room that do a geotechnical assessment. Anyone here does geotechnical assessment? So again, that's where the kind of specialists come in. But it's important that communication there's a feedback loop on that as well. Has anyone used this form or similar? It's changed. Some of the big companies will have forms for capturing these regulation 32 appraisals, managing change. And it's important that it is actually documented. Again, it doesn't have to be described like this. Excellent. So, any questions? So normally when we go through these talks, we just pick on one of these. So the idea that we're going to rattle through everything in the theory is quite information and engagement. So we touched on this earlier when we looked at engaging with the shop fires and blast design, and this piece actually really focuses in on the importance of that. It was done in conjunction with the drill and blast group, so that's the other piece, and it references the quarry regs with regard to blast spec 825. In this document, there's a bit of a toolbox talk and some slides, and this was an example here. Again, I don't know, it doesn't really matter where the site was, but we've got a situation here where you had a restored landform. You can see it there, and shot was taken in the quarry, which was just the other side, and it caused that landform failed across a public access. Quite a significant situation. No one was hurt. I mean, it would have been obviously a catastrophic kind of failure. The chances of someone walking on as that happened may have been slim, but this was still there. That's the point. If there's a risk of something that's happening, should be controlled. And the problem, I think, came, and again, I'm talking about one I don't actually know the full details of, but I think it was to do with a disconnect between historic features on the site, understanding the quarry design, the proximity of the quarry to this feature, and the nature of the material. So this whole piece looks at the importance of getting that connection through. Quite a number of geotechnical related issues that I've dealt with have been associated with drill and blast activity in geos, to be expected. Yeah, has anyone had any experiences of maybe good or bad from quarry design, blast design?
Next subject.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Inspection of rock faces toolbox tool. This is as it says, it's a toolbox tool. It's got a few slides in, low on kind of detail really. It's just got lots of pictures, quite shocking, and it's designed to have some quite shocking pictures that you can share and discuss with people. And they'll say, oh, I know it never happened on my site. It's always easier to identify issues on someone else's site. But you can see things here. Now, quite often, when you get a geotechnical specialist or anyone new to the site come into a quarry, they'll look at things from different angles. They'll see these kind of things that you may be blinded to by familiarity. And quite often people say, oh, that would never happen on my site. Well, it does. These geotechnical events and these rock falls, either just spalling in general or actually structurally kind of controlled rockfall, do happen, and they still happen. Sometimes they can get things like this happening, and someone quite well-meaning will come through every morning and scrape it up off the road, chuck it on the side, and no one hears anything of it. Sometimes those small events can be precursors to much larger failures and issues. That's quite well understood. In some cases, if you see things like this spawning is a bigger issue, possibly. If you see water issuing from the face, and particularly discoloured water coming from the face, that's quite a weird thing to see. Suggests things are being washed out. So really focusing in on the importance of inspecting rock faces and what to look for is good to do. I feel over the years that I've seen so many different people come through the quarries, whether they're quarry managers or operators on the sites, that this is a message that you need to keep reinforcing, I think. I mean, the quarry regs themselves have been around since 1999, but we're still talking about them through all this now, and we're still producing guidance and ways to engage with them. Inspections. Many of us do inspections as part of our daily role. I think, you know, on your site, you get to know your sites quite well and you do them. Quite often they are, it's a thankless task, isn't it? You've got tick, 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 tick. Seen cases in the past where you print out their inspection forms with the ticks already on them. An interesting way of doing it. But it's important to really think about, you know, who's doing those inspections, are they competent, and what are we asking people to inspect as well? Are you asking people to inspect lock faces before a shift in the middle of winter? Chances are they're not going to see much. Maybe they are if they've got lights on the machine. Does the weather have an impact? Obviously it will do. So heavy rain, freeze-thaw. Is the inspection frequency adjusted accordingly? Maybe needed, may not. Management of stockpiles. So we looked at one earlier which had some job cards in, which was related to forming tips and stockpiles are pretty much the same as far as regs are concerned. It's just again some guidance here. I mean, this looks pretty extreme, but I have to say, you know, I've seen quite a bit of this in certain sites, depending on the material. And stockpiles, we shouldn't underestimate those, because there have been some nasty instances in the past, particularly because you've got an area here in your site where the public may be coming in. They might be coming in with tractors and trailers. Some people might be handballing stuff into the backs of those vehicles as well, a lot of moving equipment. And yeah, 1 minute you could be trying to build up your stockpiles, and next you might be trying to destock in between. Does anyone have any multi-level stockpiles on their site?
Really not doing with.
I mean, it can, these can either develop or they can develop as just one very big stockpile, and then geotechnical specialists might come in and just say, oh, you know, you should really split that and turn it into how do you do that? You know, how is it practical? Can you do that? So I see quite a lot of challenge with this on the sand and gravel sites, particularly where you've got sand materials that can hang up, but also dust. Dust is a particularly challenging in some quarries, particularly PSV quarries, Jensen Sealing sites, creating this dust. Where are you going to put it? What are you going to do with it? Is it a stockpile? Is it a tip? Has it got a value or not? So yeah, it's again a good way of visualizing. This box talk on overburden stripping, what came out, because it was recognised that in a number of cases, a lot of this work was being done in quite difficult situations. You know, it could be complex topographies, difficult overburden and geology, and it may not even be being done by the quarry itself. There might be load and haul contractors involved with this, and the communication around that can be challenging and difficult sometimes. So some guidance to help with that could be adapted to provide a bit more of a nuanced kind of safety induction for them or anyone working on these type of projects is important. And I think, you know, I just use the term project data. These can be quite significant operations in their own right, not to be underestimated. Lots of points here just to get kind of thoughts going. Again, one slide from memory within the toolbox talk. To communication into the process. So it's talking about things that might get neglected in these type of operations. Do you need to appoint a blasting contractor for this? About an estates manager or someone who understands the permitting requirements for the site, blast restrictions, vibration limits, working hours and things like that. The shot firing rules need to be amended to cover overburden blasting. Some of these, this can get quite difficult, particularly if you've got designs being done by one person and then you're giving those to a shot firer and asking them to do some potentially almost impossible developments in ground that's uneven or very fragmented or weathered. What I'd like to think is that in an ideal scenario, there's a project team, project lead, you have all these people come together, you have regular meetings, pre-start discussions, there's a tender document that has all these designs in it, it's being outsourced. But how often does that scenario happen? Or is it just the case, right? Well, 1 minute you've got the budget, the next you haven't got the budget, or we have now, and by the way, we've got the money and it's coming up to mid-October and we're going to start picking up shift. Never quite plays out. So this guidance could help structure those discussions. So I'll do these last aspects here. I mean, before I do, any thoughts on that? Is overburden stripping a big part of the roles here? It's a lot. I know, speaking for Tom, we do a lot of that, obviously, every year, and those relationships with the people, if it's their own people or contractors, is so important. Quarry Regs Regulation 32 appraisals. So we've touched on this before in terms of managing change. This really delves into that Reg 32 process in a bit more detail. And it gives you some guidance on the geometry of features here that constitute significant hazards in terms of the ACOP, the approved code of practice and quarry regulation. It might be that you go through and you tick these boxes and you think, oh, right, it forms the definition, it meets the criteria of a significant hazard. You speak to your geotechnical specialist, they might say, actually, yes, but there might be some distinctions to make. So, is a 1.5 meter high bund that extends for 200 meters around your quarry a significant hazard by virtue of its area? Is it a tip? Would it be? I don't know, be pragmatic about that. But other things would be, and it's quite useful. There might be things on here that don't necessarily meet these criteria, but if you look up here, you think actually, yeah, they are. That is quite a hazard. If the structure failed, could anyone be harmed? If the structure failed, could anyone outside the quarry be affected in any way? How often do we look outside the boundaries of our quarries? And we talked about the boundary of the site being important. It's also important to think, well, what happens with that old tip that's been up there for many, many years? Could it fail outside, down the slope and outside the area of their control? Something I'm interested in, I suppose, now going forward, we seem to be having much long periods of sustained wet weather and things like that. Could that become a risk for these things to degrade more quickly?
I think we wouldn't say, Rob, in the coal business, we were at a topsoil tip at a site boundary near a major trunk road. And most times of the year, it was innocuous, it would never fail. And you wouldn't feel it's the quarry grounded, but in time of heavy rain, what's the coal tip behind it? Yeah. So I think a dam, you can't have topsoil tip as a dam. So this would have happened in heavy storms. But you have to be there to actually see it. In that case, then, if it failed, it could have somebody outside the site boundary. there's take the drains through it and put in a rock drain through it to make sure it couldn't dam again. So this was it wasn't a sick hazard because it was too small, but because it's acting in dam and rainfall, if it failed, it could then block the main road.
It's interesting, isn't
So
it?
that was quarry inspection to see this phenomenon happening only in certain times.
That's the value of doing an appraisal. Every feature gets an appraisal like that, so you make that kind of informed judgment, and things change, things with time. So yeah, this is one way of capturing those kind of questions you may have. I know we talked about this type of format earlier, but you can look at this type of guidance for. Quarry design, right? So this is hard to read, but it's talking about the importance here of when we're producing quarry designs, how to make sure, firstly, identify all relevant personnel involved in the design, identify the individual responsible for the design, identify and gather all information relative to support the design, identify all the relevant design parameters. I'm saying the word design a lot here, and the word design is in the quarry regs over 60 times. It's used a lot, so that's why it's appearing in here quite a bit. Identify all geotechnical elements for appraisal. Non-geotechnical elements require a generic assessment. Appraise to identify significant hazards, which we talked about earlier, just in the last piece. Identify significant hazards. So what this is trying to do is put together that whole process around creating your quarry design. And some companies will have ways and means of doing that. Maybe some people have specific roles around this. Does anyone who's in a quarry have access or see their quarry design? It might have a final quarry design. Shows the finished article. You might also have designs for the active phase. Design can take various forms as well. Rules for some simple features. Or other cases, it might be a full-blown schedule and assessment report, which has plans, maps, stability analysis, and everything else on it. This is a good one on that side as well. Which regulations apply? It's a bit like when we were talking earlier about when's a quarry not a quarry for abandoning things. But here, earthworks construction project, which regulations take precedence? Has the site been notified to the HSE as a quarry? Yes. The quarry regs. Quite a quick answer there, but that's not necessarily as simple as it might appear when you're working, when you're on your site. And some companies might look at things in different ways and might try and demarcate other places out. So has the site been notified to HSE as a quarry? No. Should the site be defined as a quarry? It's trying to catch you there as well again and ask you the same question. Is it a quarry, basically? No. So CDM. I mean, has anyone got a view on that in terms of CDM regulations and use?
Spoke to Mike Tetley about that once. He said he would still do you under the quarry regs, not CDM. If you're running a project in a quarry under CDM, that you've demarked the CDM, you can still prosecute you under the quarry regs.
It's the same for oral pits, external jobs, that the HSE see the quarry regs as the minimum standard you'll apply. They expect these standards to apply even if it's under CDM.
I think that's a good way.
It takes out any ambiguity as to whether it's a oral pit or a quarry. It's just all operating under the same.
I have to say, I mean, I think we're fortunate with our HSE quarry inspectors in that they are very pragmatic, but they're quite straightforward. They could stand at the site and say, well, it says quarry on the site, it's got your name on here, your company name. So is this a quarry or not? And you can it's quite useful to be able to refer to some of this guidance sometimes, particularly if you're dealing with your operators and with your management as well, and just ask these kind of questions, make those type of challenges. Quarry lagoon inspections. It's noted that lagoons represent quite a distinct hazard and some quite unique features around them. So there's some guidance on that. We're probably looking at updating some of this information, actually. There's a diagram there that gave some kind of terms that could be used around parts of a lagoon, and here are some features that you can see, some issues. We always like to take pictures of things that are going wrong. Looks more interesting, holes in the ground, sand kind of boiling and bubbling up. This is still bubbling up here, which could be a result of something like this happening underneath the retaining bone. Yeah, big challenge lagoons, I think, not to be underestimated. I mean, we have lagoons on all our sites. I would say on some of the sand and gravel sites as well, we can almost ignore this at our peril with them. We sometimes think the sand and gravel is a bit easier, but this is quite challenging. Has anyone had any good, bad, and different experiences with lagoons?
I think the problem's a lot in Scotland is wave erosion.
Yeah.
The waves got high energy, and once the waves start heading from the west, all hit the same point over the years, it does create significant erosion.
It's a good point.
Which, and often there's limited access because lagoons are built in the quarry. Once you start to erode, you can't get access back again. So it's often a problem trying to remediate the erosion from waves. So it causes much more work than you expect to get access then to actually fix the problem.
It's a good point, isn't it? How many designs do we see that show the prevailing wind condition on and things like that? And there's features quite unique to them, like the freeboard, like drainage, and overflow, passive overflow pipes, basically just happens, things like that. This piece of guidance is quite old now. It's information sheet 1, safe methods of working. Safe methods of working factors to consider in terms of faces. Again, another not so colourful job card there, but some useful guidance nonetheless. If you want to look at that, consider that in terms of how you're working your faces and forming your rock traps and blast piles. It's always good to look at a cross section, although sometimes it's quite idealised, isn't it? Reality can be a bit messy. So. Yeah, useful point of reference, but obviously it's got to be specific to your site as well. Future publications. So we're looking at, I've mentioned throughout this, we're going to be reviewing some of that guidance we've been through, putting it in the new QNJAC kind of colours, logo and format, so it's a bit more accessible to people. Intralinking it with other guidance as well where we can, because there's a little bit of crossover and repetition, and you'll pick that up as I went through some of the new pieces that are coming out in the new year. Geotechnical assessments, fundamentals of it, what you should have in a geotechnical assessment, and like geotechnical emergency checklist. This is designed to be something that could potentially go on the wall that you could look at and say, okay, you have a lagoon failure, tip failure, what do you do? In many cases with safety issues on your site, like a fire or flood, you may already have that. Why don't we have that necessarily for geotechnical matters? So, and there'll be some more, I'm sure. Well, there's other few pieces in the offing. Get involved and I mean, getting involved. There's, if you want to go on the website, if you are interested, anyone can express an interest in getting involved with the subgroups, any of those I've mentioned, and. Yeah, that was a synopsis of the event that we had recently around the future of our profession. These were some questions we asked of the geotechnical specialists and geologists in the room at the time. But this last one here, 25 years since the quarry regs, what geotechnical matters should the QNJAC Geotechnical Subcommittee focus on? And that's really a question that I wanted to ask of anyone in this room. If there's any guidance they wanted or anything they wanted to see coming out of QNJAC, we could make happen. So obviously, I need to appreciate you've gone through loads of guidance, you probably think, goodness, gone through anything that you could ever have thought, but I'm sure there's other stuff that might crop up, that it does easily for you. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for, there was so much in that presentation. The right time, if you want any more information, go on the QNJAC website and have a look at it. There's just too much to take in tonight. But do you have any questions from here and from online?